Hello, and welcome to the Let's Talk Transformation podcasts. Today's guest will be helping us think about transformation, transformative change, but also how to implement this in a holistic way. I'm delighted to welcome Lindsay Phillips, entrepreneur and transformation expert. Lindsay, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. Lindsay, like me, you spend your time helping organizations, teams, leaders navigate change, but also guiding them through the process to ensure sustainable change. And we'll be talking about transformation, of course. Also, we'll touch on women in tech, entrepreneurship, and the onset of AI, and everybody's biggest questions today. But what does that mean for the way we drive change? And can we start with your own story? Because for me, your own story is one of continuous transformation. I mean, what brought you to entrepreneurship and transformation through your various pivots from working in an organization to co-founding to founding your own business? What happened there?
Yeah, I started out my very first job out of college. I was a receptionist. I got my foot in the door. It was the recession of
Mm,
2007. And so I was lucky enough to be in an organization that really fostered promoting people from within. And they gave me a lot of opportunities to just try new things. And I'm
mm,
so grateful for that. But it also means I played in a lot of spaces within this company.
mm,
Kind of moved into organizational change management and had a lot of passion. I have a lot of passion for it,
mm,
obviously. But
mm.
one of the things I noticed was OCM and change managers are brought in so often at the end. Like right before training is when you
Totally.
get in. And I was so frustrated because I was like, if you guys had
Mm,
made different decisions 6 months ago, this wouldn't be so painful. And
mm,
so, I really stepped into sort of more of a project manager, program manager role internally within companies and found a lot of success of just, what I would call like stakeholder focused program management of really
mm,
thinking about a company is just a group of people, and how are we going to get these people to make a change?
mm,
Um, I was lucky enough, I kind of moved companies a couple times. I was lucky enough to get a severance as a company was closing, and I really just always felt this urge to try to create my own thing. I think I was
mm,
still, even as a program manager, I was still somewhat constrained by leadership's decisions.
mm.
Like, I want to make the decisions. So
Yeah.
2021, I like set out on my own. And it's been such a journey. And so there's been a couple sort of rounds of opportunities and companies that I've
Mm.
been on in that space. But I don't feel any urge to go back. Like it's still like
No.
I'm master of my own fate, and
Yeah.
there's something really exciting about that.
Yeah, I agree, you and me both. And I think what I'm hearing in there is also being constrained by systems, being allowed to explore, but also wanting to explore, wanting to experiment, wanting to step into different horizons, bigger horizons. And I know you have a massively holistic approach to transformation. Um, can we also just define for you, Lindsay, what is the holistic approach to transformation? Because both holistic and transformation are quite big buzzwords these days, aren't they? Like agile or anything else. So I think it's really interesting. And I don't know if we do have the same definition. We probably don't have exactly the same definition, which is also why it's interesting. What is the holistic approach to transformation for you?
Yes, I agree. Like those words are very
Yeah.
like and used a lot. To me, a holistic transformation is not just how are you implementing a piece of software,
Mm,
right? Is how do people, and especially I think AI is a really good opportunity for us to start to explore this. In order to implement AI and get actual value out of it, people have to completely change how they view themselves, how they view the work that they provide, what their own personal value is.
mm,
And so we have to start and consider those changes internal to people before we can even get to the place of trying to get the whole organization to change how it functions.
mm,
To me, it's like it's both holistic, but also sort of macro and micro changes happening at the same time.
mm,
And creating a plan that informs all of those journeys at one time is kind of,
mm.
I think, to me, the holistic transformation work.
Totally. And like you say, it starts on the inside, doesn't it? It's sort of individual. If I take the sort of concentric circles of me, my team, the organization type of thing. But the
Yeah.
onset of AI is changing business models. And like you say, it's changing the way we work, the way we think about the way we work, the way we think about our value proposition. What are your observations there? What do you see with your clients at the moment? Are they doing that inner work, or are they moving straight to what solution do we need? How can we how can we put AI in without necessarily thinking about what it means for them first and foremost, but also for the organization?
I can tell by the way you asked that question, you already know the
It's
answer.
loaded. It's a loaded question for me.
Yeah, I mean, you probably saw that research from MIT that 95% of AI pilots have failed in the last year. And to me, that's because this AI hype curve has been very AI is plug and play. Just get it, and then you get all of these returns, and you're going to be
Mm,
able to let go of 20% of your staff. And that's just not how it works. It doesn't.
mm,
And I think you and I probably knew that going into this, but
yes.
other people are now discovering that. And so one of the things I'm seeing is even the companies and the organizations that are approaching AI rollout in a way that
Mm,
is organized and informed, individuals are still really looking at this as I need a tactical solution.
mm,
And so, for example, we all have to become expert prompt engineers if we want to be working in the next 3 to 5 years.
totally.
And so
Mm,
to go into a class and try to train somebody on how to write a good prompt, what I'm seeing is folks they're underestimating the level of effort learning that is going to take. And they want to go straight to what's the agent? How do I make an agent? Where do I go?
yeah.
And they're really skipping the hard work.
Mm,
My current sort of
mm.
focus is how to get the organization to buy in and then the individuals to buy into the journey they have to make.
And what do you think that changes for the way they view their value proposition to the organization, but also their team's value proposition to the organization? Because intellectual understanding it is one thing, as we both know, but actually embodying it and doing something with that understanding is a different kettle of fish, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I think every single person and every single team needs to redefine their inputs and their outputs and the value that they're adding sort of in the
Mm,
middle.
mm,
For somebody who's been doing the same thing for 20 or 30 years, redefining the value that you're adding it's an identity change for some
yeah,
folks. That
totally.
is
Mm,
really deep, scary work to be
mm,
done.
mm.
Um, and so, yeah, an AI training class is not going to do that.
No.
Like that's a deeper
Yeah.
project.
Yeah. And on that note, therefore, when an organization or a team brings you in to manage change, what are the first three things that you scan for then? Everyone goes in with an idea of diagnostics of what they're looking for as markers or flags on readiness and maturity. So what do you scan for and what do you break down or reset immediately to look to create this momentum for more sustainable change?
I love this question.
Thank you.
So the first thing I always look for is where does authority sit and how are decisions made? Because there's all these different types of cultures, and you
Mm,
have to be aware of who's going to be followed. And even if you get a decision made with the wrong people, it's not a decision made. And so trying
mm,
to get a feel of the land very quickly and then setting up the mechanisms to pull those folks in to be sort of critical leaders of the process
mm,
is step one. And I've
mm.
stepped in it a couple times and I've missed that step. And so this is why it's always step one. Um, the second thing I look at just from a cultural perspective is how much curiosity folks have about a change like this. And a lot of that comes from their just historic experience
Mm,
with
mm,
enterprise rollouts. And so if a company has never done an enterprise rollout successfully, that could either be because they've never tried, which is one sort of experience, or it could be because they've tried multiple times and failed. And
yeah.
that's a bigger challenge. And so you want to understand that before you start wheeling and dealing change
Mm,
language.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then I think, you know, the third thing I would look for is the organization's openness to different perspectives. And so if you're coming in external, yeah, people love to hire consultants and then tell them what to do. And
Yeah.
so if they're actually listening and internalizing it and then helping actually develop strategies to implement it, I think that's sort of the third thing. And if they don't have that, then it's a lot of work to um, help them see your suggestions as their idea. So then they will champion it. And so it's just different approaches for how you get sort of your change strategy in place.
Mm. And would you say that that's one of the biggest challenges, the curiosity challenge? Because in large delivery-driven organizations where they have the tools, because often that's how change occurs, isn't it? They put the tool in first and then think, oh, how can we shoehorn things into what we've just put in as a tool? Um, what's the biggest challenge you encounter when it comes to them actually leading change? You've talked about them sort of onboarding that idea as their own, understanding what it means, but implementation is often a very different thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and I totally agree. The lack of curiosity is such a problem from rolling out a change because not only are they not going to necessarily be fast adopters of the change, they're
Mm,
also going to help you identify risks on the way. And
mm,
so if they aren't tuned in and thinking about this and like open to the possibility, they're not going to help you identify the roadblocks that
mm,
are in front of you so you can get them out of the way so you can be successful.
mm,
And so especially in sort of like top-down hierarchical
mm.
organizations, I find there's that lack of curiosity sometimes from the boots on the ground because they're like, you're just going to tell me what to do anyway. And it's like, no, I need you engaged because you're the one who's
Yeah.
going to make it successful. And so
Mm,
that can be a big shift too of trying to ask people to step into a role that they maybe have never been asked to play before for their company.
mm. Which is a big ask in itself, isn't it? But I think with the amount of uncertainty and the speed at which tech moves, particularly, and therefore, the whole piece around how organizations work internally, but also with each other, building the ecosystems and the partnerships that they need to. Um, can you tell me about a time where you had to pivot mid-project? Because we've just put all this in place. We've just convinced everyone enough for them to actually get moving and get going and start championing it. And then you have to pivot either due to market changes, budget changes, organizational strategy changes. So can you tell me about a time where you had to pivot mid-project, either in your own entrepreneurial journey or in a client journey, and what your biggest learning was from that, Lindsay?
Yeah. So one of my very first projects, I was assigned to this program and we were doing this giant content management migration. And it was like a $13 million program. And I was given one project, it's sort of in the middle. And it just was not going very well. And I couldn't tell if it was supposed to be like that because, again, I was pretty new to the space. And I realized very quickly that the strategy didn't work, the approach
Mm,
didn't, and the technical resources were not bought in, but they had never really been asked if they were bought in before.
okay.
So about sort of halfway through this project, I got the technical resources and their manager in a room together, and we did sort of the levels of agreement exercise, which is like
Mm,
1 to 5, show your fingers right now of how much do you agree that this plan will ever be successful? We didn't even
right.
say on time. We just like, we'll ever be successful. And every single technical resource was a 1 out of 5. And it was such a wake-up call for the manager to see that. And it was a safe way for folks to do it because it was in a closed room and
Mm,
people they trusted, and it was all at the same time. And so it wasn't, no one was going to get called out or highlighted. And so it was a huge wake-up call. And we ended up basically canceling the program and then re-migrating everything back. Because after out of their feedback, I went through and kind of figured out what it would actually take. And it was going to end up being like a $35 million program. And it was just not worth the investment at that point.
mm.
I think they just came out with a study about doubling back aversion. There's research around people don't like to go backwards. They want to just
Oh,
push no matter what. It's like you got to be willing to look all directions and figure
yeah.
out which is the best way to go.
Yeah. I think that's really important, looking in all directions, because we can still accept failure as a point of learning and never look back, which in some cases can be a driving force, in other cases can mean that we miss something. So that looking back and going back to where it's a little more painful, I think is really important. And what did those moments that you chose to give us that example, but I know there are others from our discussion before the show, what did it teach you about resilience, Lindsay, and how have you used that in your personal entrepreneur journey?
Yeah, I'm curious to hear your opinion on this
Mm.
because Americans, I think, over-identify with their job. Like when you go out and meet somebody, the first question they ask is, "What do you do?"
Uh-huh.
And if somebody holds that sort of identity, it is very painful to fail. It is very painful to have to backtrack. And so I think the more that we can separate our jobs from ourselves and
Mm.
the things that happen to my company or the things that happen to me in this job are independent of my value as a person and as an individual is, I think that's the biggest sort of work to be done. And so the more I really have spent a lot of time like in therapy really just trying to separate my identity and my sort of who I understand myself to be from my job or what I post on LinkedIn or what people, are saying about me because it's
Mm.
can't be that you can't let other people have that much influence over your like inner peace. So
No, no.
me, that's like the biggest sort of separation. But I don't know if it's the same in Europe, if people have that same sort of over-identification.
So they do. They do,
Okay.
and I think it's also due to the way organizational culture is and the way we're formatted to be successful. And you
Mhm.
sort of become your results because there's a massive action and performance bias in what we reward in organizations, but also in education. I'm talking for Europe because that's the place I know the best.
Mhm.
The systems are still geared to quite transactional, quite linear, performance biased results, which has made businesses and people very successful. But I think the issue is, as you say, when you become I call it the I am my results,
Right.
which means that when you have to dissociate into who you actually are, if I dissociate it from your job title, from the car you drive, from the perception in the organization, and I even feel like saying the mask you wear at work, if I dissociate that from you, who are you and what's your value proposition?
Hmm.
And I think, particularly since COVID, I've been having more and more of these discussions with leaders, but I'm also seeing a shift in organizations. Some of it's generational, um, to people wanting to be who they are and have a title, as opposed to people wanting to be their title.
Hmm.
And I think that's bringing something else to the mix in itself. I don't know if you're seeing that same trend generationally in the US, but particularly here, there's a lot more um, discussion around purpose, around sense making, around creating more collective ecosystems, partly because we have to, because
Hmm.
that's the way business is going and the market's going, but partly because this whole cycle of learning, unlearning, relearning, and working in this world that is constantly shifting is very different than what we were formatted to do, which was the industrial era.
Hmm.
And in a way, for me, I think it needs even more resilience,
Yeah.
because you have to have resilience at both levels. What I call sort of transactional organizational resilience for getting stuff done in inverted commas, and also resilience to take a good hard look at yourself. And that's hard, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, that really resonates. Um, I I had a woman earlier in my career who gave me feedback that was basically, you can't behave the way you're behaving at work because it's unprofessional. And it was just how I carried myself in meetings. I tend to have kind of I think I'm a warm person, but I tend to be very informal as well.
Hmm.
And I really took it to heart. And she said, I pointed out that we're men in the organization who behaved that way and we're very successful. We're upper leaders. And she said, they're men, they can do that. You're a woman, you can't. And so I really went home and journaled about
Wow.
that and like had some deep thought of like, oh, maybe I'm not built for or cut out for professional careers if that's what's going to happen. And that's how people are going to be judging me. And I eventually got to the point where I was like, I have to show it with authenticity. Now I can do it with somewhat context. I did take some feedback around maybe how informal I was
Yes.
showing up in very formal settings. But I eventually was like, I think people who want authenticity will love me and people who don't won't. And I will ultimately end up in places that foster that. And so
Mm,
I have seen the majority of the places I've worked have really encouraged it. But I think
mm.
that's because I wouldn't last in places that didn't encourage that. So,
Yeah.
um,
Wh-
yeah.
wh- Which is testament to your character, but also to the resilience you've built and the thoughts you've had around that subject. I mean, if I look at how much the world has moved on technologically, scientifically, etc., and then this particular subject, which is close to my heart, of gender parity, we haven't moved on hardly at all. Although there are quite a few shifts that have happened. When I hear stories like that, and those stories are still happening in today, 2025, people are still making those types of comments, and particularly in the tech world, where the diversity of the people who are coding the large language models is absolutely key to them being relevant, fair, equitable, etc. So getting women into tech, but also into entrepreneurship because they bring something different to the table. It's often they're often portrayed in cliches, aren't they? You know, the female founder, the mumpreneur, the woman who can do this or who can't do this, but the man can. Um, you know, do you find that those stereotypes are present for you, Lindsay, when you go to clients because you're working in the tech sector? And how do you actively dismantle those stereotypes? You know, I'm hearing that you've decided a conscious decision to be who you are, which is brilliant,
Mhm.
irrespective of whether you're a woman or not in a male-dominated environment, you're just turning up as Lindsay, is what I read from your words, but feel free.
Yeah. Yeah, I spent 10 years working in oil and gas,
Mm,
IT in oil and gas. So it was a men's field in a men's industry. And did make this conscious decision. And I think part of what I do when I move into a new space is I present sort of all the facets, right? We're all diamonds, we all contain
mm,
multitude. I present multiple facets that maybe people wouldn't expect. And I also encourage and ask other people to share their variety of facets. And so I think this helps, it does help address some of the biases because there's
mm,
been research that the more people meet others who do not fit their stereotypes, the more likely they are to abandon the stereotypes. And so the more that we can really show people are not just this little limited thing you're looking for, they can be multitudes. We're actually challenging the bias that is like inherent to people.
mm.
Now it's a long game, right?
Yeah, totally.
It's a very long journey, but I think to me, it's creating spaces where you encourage people to bring their full selves
Mm,
and that other people can witness that, I think is
mm.
kind of the work.
And like you say, it is a long game because we're breaking unconscious or often making conscious things that are unconscious before we can even do things about that or with that. But so how do you resource yourself, Lindsay? How do you find, I mean, change is notorious for being quite high on the energy you need to give it to drive it to get it to a place where it can actually have some impact. So how do you manage your energy when you've also got the added internal discussion of what are they going to think? How am I turning up? Or do you not have that internal discussion anymore?
I think I've had so many positive experiences of showing up in a room and
Mm,
having people assess for a little bit and try to figure out kind of what's happening and then
mm,
respond positively at
mm,
all levels in an organization that I'm not that worried about it anymore.
mm.
It also helps. I think the more authentically you can show up, when people respond well to you, it fills my cup because they're not
Yeah.
responding well to like with my first sort of management role. I was wearing a suit and kicking down doors and was like this, like boss babe. And it was just like so not me.
Mm,
But when people responded well to that, it didn't mean anything to me. It didn't like fill my cup. But now if I show up as myself and have somebody respond to that, it keeps me going and it keeps me really energized and it helps me feel like they're on my team. So it's not just me trying to push this change. It's this sort of network of people around me who are supporting it.
mm. And if you had to sort of create like a survival kit for women who wanted to lead, launch, transform in a holistic way, you know, in large organizations, because let's be clear, a lot of them are still quite male dominated, particularly in those industries. And that isn't a victim. I'm not being a victim, it's just an observation. But, you know, what would the three secret weapons in there be, you know, around mindsets or tools or strategies that you would always include, Lindsay, for women in that entrepreneurial space?
Yeah. So I think the biggest challenge I have seen personally for women is if you have a big feeling and you have a big response to something, people will write you off as hysterical. And it's not really fair, and men are able to be angry in a public
Mm,
space in a way that's different than a woman being angry. And especially because I think a lot of women tend to cry when they're angry. So it's like it's not helpful. So to me, one of the first things I would recommend somebody do is really foster what Tara Brach calls the sacred pause, which is when something happens, try to just hold space for yourself in that moment to figure out how you want to respond. Don't react right away.
mm,
That is such a journey to get to
of
that place.
course.
But once you're able to do that, it's a superpower. And the longer you can hold that pause, the more space you can hold for people to kind of sit in also what they just said. And
Mm,
so I
mm,
think that's number one is the sacred pause. The second thing I would really recommend, I don't know why I'm like recommending books right now, but there's a book called Nonviolent Communication. Have you
Mm.
read it?
Yes.
I think the title is a little outdated. Like I would call it more courageous communication. And it is the ability to communicate with somebody how they're impacting those around them without assigning intention or meaning or blame, and really just sharing in a neutral way your experience. And it's very
Mm.
valuable to have to say, I feel this way. I want to build a deeper, better connection with you. And
Mm.
I started out using this in my personal life, and then once I figured out how to use it at work as a change leader,
Mm.
it's valuable because there are certain people who are going to be resistant, and you have to go get kind of one-on-one with them to say, help me understand what the problem is. Like, I want us to be on the same team. I think we have the same goals, and to be able to have that conversation
Mm.
neutrally and calmly is really critical. So to
Mm.
be able to be regulated through that.
Mm. Mm. And I'm just, if I come back to the sacred pause and nonviolent communication and what that means as a model,
Mhm.
we're essentially back to the fact that understanding human beings and humans' reactions to change is so important when you're trying to transform tools, processes, organizations. Because if I come back to the beginning of our conversation, like you say, it's about people,
Mhm.
and people doing what they can, not necessarily what they want, but what they can and what they're being asked to do. And when you're working with change and this resistance shows up, you've just given us a great example of how you would take somebody on one to one. How do
Mhm.
you work with collectives, teams, communities, project teams to move them from this place of essentially fear
Mhm.
and stagnation to a place where we can come to what you did in one of your first experiences in the workplace, which was just have a go at lots of different things?
Yeah. So to me, fear is generally informed by something. And
Mm.
so you have to understand what people are afraid of and then help them imagine a world where it will actually be okay.
Mm.
So when I'm in a culture of fear or an organization where a lot of people are very anxious, I guess I would call it more anxiety than fear.
Mm.
I like to have like a really broad risk workshop where you get everyone in a room together and you have it's old school sticky notes, so it's very like embodied where people can get up and like interact with their anxieties and
Mm.
in a way with other people around them. And then you together put together a plan of like, well, let's understand how likely this is. You're allowed to be scared of it, but if it's not highly likely, we don't need to worry a lot about it, but we've written it down. Thank you for bringing it up. And so I think creating space for people to voice what they're concerned about and then helping them understand what you would do if that happened,
Mm.
why it is. And so then when it comes back up in conversation, you can be like, yeah, we've talked about that. We have a plan for that. Um, let's continue to kind of move through and then see if it happens.
Mm.
Me, that's like a quick sort of tool to use for
Mm.
some fear.
Yeah, it's excellent because it's formalizing, isn't it? And then you either do something with it or you don't. And it brings me back to the idea of bias. We were talking about bias in sort of gender parity, but also bias in general. All humans have a brain and all brains have bias. So, I mean, if I look at things like confirmation bias, which turns into decision-making bias, and how many perspectives you take on board or you don't, I mean, what would your advice be there? Because I'm just imagining the onset of a new tool. Let's say you're putting in a whole new HR system or IT system or ERP backend system. It needs to be done by a certain date. It needs to serve all countries, all regions, all sites, all people. We can quite easily get into the confirmation bias of I'll just ask people who think what I think, and then it'll get done more quickly, and it'll be ready on and it will be
Uh-huh.
ready on time. What would your advice be there, Lindsay, for trying to anticipate that and not just coming back to the very first thing you said, which was I'll wait until we're ready to train people when everything's ready to go, and then ask them what they think.
Yeah, you're so right. Something I've really noticed is folks tend, if somebody's considered resistant, everyone will avoid them
Mm.
at all costs and try to like interact with them as little as possible because it's uncomfortable and it
Mm.
doesn't to be around those people.
Mm.
And so I think the more that we can identify who those folks are and then pull them as much as we can into the fold of obviously that you have concerns,
Mm.
those written down, let's understand them. And then I need you bought into us coming up with a solution to your problems together. Now, there are some people who are, they have an agenda, they're actually against what you're doing. Like those kinds of folks, you're not going to win them over with a
No,
rhythm.
no.
I think people who are coming at it with like like a real concern, those are folks who, once they're on your team and once they're bought in, they're going to actually help you identify risks and push through them more quickly. And so I think that's the thing is like if you find yourself not liking talking to someone, be curious about what the reason is.
Mm.
And if there's something getting in the way of you engaging with them so that they can really kind of like be more closely involved.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because people say, what you don't like, what triggers you from someone else is telling you something about yourself. And I think very too often it's too easy, particularly if you have large teams, to just move on to something different and let that sort of fester. So, I mean, and I think particularly when we're putting automated tools in place, it's very important to understand what that means for people and that people understand what that means for them as well. If I come back to AI, how do you see the onset of AI changing what you do and the way you do it? We touched
Mhm.
on it briefly when you were talking about it's going to change the way everybody thinks about the way they work. But if I take our sector, which is the transformation sector, if you think about the way you go into a client, I asked you earlier, what are your three flags for managing change? What do you look out for? What are your first sort of diagnostics, if you like? Do you think AI is going to change that, Lindsay, the way you work with an organization?
Yeah, for sure. It sets us up to do, especially if you're moving into a new client, it's so much easier to get a sense of the lay of the land
Mm,
with what are the things that this company is doing strategically? What is the culture of the company? And so I can more quickly align sort of what I'm trying to do with the strategy and the values that the company already exhibits. And so it really shortens the time to getting like onboarding
mm, mm.
also does shorten the time to creation of materials, right? Because 10 years ago, we spent 15% or 20% of the project planning, and then the rest of the time was material development. It was such a
Yeah, yeah.
gap. And now that is can be iterative, it can be really short, and like that time to delivery is so much shorter. So it's going to change how we
Mm,
see our work. It's also going to change how work is priced because
of
I think
course.
all these consulting firms, we need to figure out how we're pricing our output if we're no longer having to do the work ourselves, you know?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's a total revamp and a paradigm shift, which I think is necessary
Mm.
and is probably maybe not as welcome yet in the consulting world, but I think it's the consulting model was shifting anyway, from not being indispensable to being dispensable. And now AI is doing so much more of the work. The real question is one of the questions we touched on earlier, what's our biggest value proposition to our client and how do we bring that to them? But I remain convinced that 90% of that value proposition is human and
Yes.
human-centered, even if it's an IT project. No disrespect to IT project, but whoever says IT project says, "Oh, you mean tools?" It's like, well, no, not
Right.
really.
I mean, I guess, yeah. Yeah, to me, the change person, and I think it's just the kind of person who goes into this work, we tend to be almost like the emotional barometer for the organization. You're just
Mm,
that person is very sensitive to changes and pressure, and they're able to read room and see dynamics. Like the fish in the water can't see the water, but if somebody else
totally.
comes in, they can notice things and try to put together plans to address it. So
Mm,
that value I think is unchanging. The other thing that I think is exciting is I don't know about you, but historically, most of the companies that had money to hire change managers were oil and gas and banking, and it was like very specific sectors. Well, I'm really excited about the possibility that it could be that the cost of our services will get to a place where nonprofits can hire
mm,
us. Like I think we will still be doing the same type of work. It might be more affordable because it'll be more condensed and more of a package. And then I
mm.
think I'm really excited about the kind of clients we're going to have in 5 years because I'm like, what a I mean, it's going to be refreshing in some ways, you know?
Totally, totally. And it fits in with my quest of democratizing access to these type of skills, democratizing access to having levers to change the conversations in your organization, because that's what changes collaboration for me. It's the quality of the conversations you're having, be that with your customer, with your peers, with your partners. So I'm quite excited about the equity that that can bring, although we don't maybe see it today. But I think, it gives more people levers to read more rooms if that's what they want to do. And if they don't know how to do that, to go and equip themselves to be able to do that. So that's what I'm the most excited about is what what tech AI can enable in the human space, I think.
Yeah, I think the other thing AI is really going to help us with if we move into a future where we have to have more clients potentially at the same time, it's really
Mm,
going to help with context switching
mm,
because that's I think one of the other consulting skills that
yeah,
that is training to try to context switch
yeah.
consistently is very mentally difficult. And so I'm pretty excited about AI's support for that.
It's going to be our agility gym.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, and time is running, but I can't let you go without asking you this question around what is, for you, Lindsay, the most transformative thing you've ever done? Like we
Mm,
said, people's definitions of transformation are different, um, but I think everyone has one of those milestone or light bulb moments that was really transformative.
yeah. So the first job I had where I was sort of the manager of an area, I was working for a C-suite person who gave me full control. I had come from a very sort of like hierarchical where every communication I wrote had to go through three levels of approval. And my first week at this company, I wrote a communication, I sent it to him, and he sent it out as it was. And I was like, oh, you don't want to do some like edits on that? He's like, why would I? You're the professional here. Why would I edit it? Now, there's some challenges there because I sometimes needed more guidance from him than I was getting in terms of strategy. But what was beautiful about it was it really let me step into my own authority and my own power. And I realized like people would just follow what I said. And it really helped me see myself as a strong leader. And that was when like, after that job, that's when I moved into entrepreneurship because I was like, I think I can do this. Like, I'm curious to see what I can do if I can kind of build on that energy. But it was pretty scary to be like, you just said that with net like that was a moment of big change.
Yeah, big change in that little moment of imposter syndrome. Oh, you mean
Uh-huh.
I'm on my own? Okay. But
Yeah.
but it's very empowering, and I can hear that in your voice, your energy. How do you think that's translated, Lindsay, into your approach that you now take to clients?
I think helping, I'm a project manager. I'm a recovering control freak in some way. So when you start your own company, you have to just trust people because you
Yeah,
cannot do it all and you can't be doing it all. And
yeah.
so I think really developing the relationship with somebody to be like,
Mm,
here's the overall goal. You do that however you see fit, and then come back if you need help, and then I'll give you guidance if it's not quite in line with what I want to be happening. But to really see that as like, no, I'm also helping build their skill set by stepping back. It's like
mhm.
letting the kid walk for the first time by themselves. Gotta
Yeah.
happen the first time at some point, you know?
Okay, I'm going to leave our listeners with that thought because you do have an ongoing project, don't you, that where you're going to use that quite heavily in the near future. But
Yeah.
yeah, I will let you say more about that or not. Um, where can people find out more about you, Lindsay, and what you do and what you're up to?
I am on LinkedIn, so it's Lindsay Phillips. ATX is my profile, and I would love if I like to have conversations about these kinds of things on LinkedIn. So if people want to connect and other people are also having these conversations, I'd love to participate in that with them. Yeah, I think kind of moving forward into this AI world and really helping organizations figure out how they're going to implement it and then get their folks on board. I think that's the work for all of us, I have a
Mm,
feeling.
totally. And what would your final call to action be to our listeners, Lindsay, for those of us sitting there thinking, okay, yeah, I've got to do something about this project. I've got to get my head around AI. I've got to make my approach to transformation a little bit more either human-centered or holistic.
If somebody wants to deepen their sort of AI expertise, which I think is kind of the most tactical thing we can all be
Mm,
doing now while the world's in chaos around
mm,
us, I really encourage everyone to treat AI like a person and like
mm.
get in the habit of talking to it like it's another human being. And that will kind of refine your ability to pull value from it. And then it will also kind of like set you up, I think, for the next steps of whatever happens in these companies we're working for and with.
Okay, super. Thank you. I'm going to leave our listeners with that. My biggest takeaway is don't shy away from it, remain curious. And I'm going to take your last point of partner with AI and see what opportunities you can bring for yourself and your organization. Lindsay,
Yeah,
thank you so much. Thank you for a great conversation.
thank you.